back to the old way where they would have to talk, whatever. And then so after they're done talking, then it would go on a vote to end debate, and they either want 60 or 50 to end debate.
Well, I don't think it should be 50. I mean, that's not even a majority, right?
Yeah.
So, or 51, but I like the 60 measure, especially in a situation like we have today when neither party has 60, because that's going to force compromise, right? That's going to force them to figure out how to work together. So my preference would be not to move that number, but my preference would be to say, and if they want to, I heard I heard yesterday that somebody suggested, well, look, if we're not going to get rid of this filibuster, we can just have these kind of, we can just say, all right, but the Senate, to get the Senate's work done, we're no longer working, we're no longer going to be in session just 3 days a week. We'll be working weekends until we get through this legislation. Again, I think there should be some discomfort in doing the filibuster, not just to the majority, but to the minority who's doing it, right? It's kind of like a strike, right? Everybody talks about a strike and how, the employees don't benefit from strikes. The longer the strike goes, the employees don't benefit from that either, because they're not getting paid during that time.
Yeah.
So there should be some cost to this to make them cautious in the application of it, right? To truly say, okay, this legislation is so egregious, or this legislation, you've not taken into any of our concerns into consideration, we can't support it, right? And make them filibuster it that way. If they could figure out how to get the rest of the Senate's business done doing that, I think that would be the best solution, and get rid of that kind of painless hold thing that nobody has to deal with. And I think you'd see a lot fewer filibusters. You would see stuff moving.
I agree. I think they should go back to the old way. I don't know. I'll have to look at, I don't know much to have an opinion about how many votes to end the debate though, or whatever, or end the filibuster. And then they've been doing stuff through budget reconciliation, and that's just a simple majority.
Right. And I think that's been abused too, right?
And they can only do that a certain amount of times, right?
There are only certain types of legislation that qualify to be put under that. Yeah. And I don't know if there's a specific limit of the amount of legislation you can use to put under that, but I do know that there's specific types of legislation that can qualify to go under the budget reconciliation. But they stretch that. I mean, that's how the Affordable Care Act got passed, was they used it for that.
You think the infrastructure plan will go through reconciliation?
I don't see that there's going to be much opposition to the infrastructure plan. I mean, at the end, listen, before Biden got in, Trump was touting an infrastructure plan. I mean, Republicans want to spend money on that stuff too. And I'm not saying that in a positive light. I just think, infrastructure bills are notorious for being places to just have all sorts of boondoggles and building useless things, right? You guys don't remember, but back in the early 2000s, late 90s, there was the big thing was the bridge to nowhere that was in Alaska, that the powerful senator from Alaska got funds to build this bridge that literally nobody drove on, but maybe him and a few constituents, right? That's what you see in transportation bills all the time.
Is this like in the remote area, or
I don't know. I think it was just in a really remote area, and literally maybe the senator and, like I said, a couple of constituents wanted it, and so he got, instead of having Alaska pay for it or their local government pay for it, they got the federal government to pay for it, right? So I am always skeptical of transportation bills. They're nothing but hey, we can dump a bunch of money into all sorts of useless projects. And we'll all get to go out and have our names associated with this new stretch of highway or this new whatever, you know.
That's why I'm funding.
So I don't anticipate, I mean, there will be some, again, okay, look. Hey, Andrew, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good. I'm going to play this because I've been looking for an excuse to do so. And it'll kind of give you my take on a particular issue right now. Let me see if I can go find this here. Real quick.
I know I haven't looked at it yet, but I know it has a lot to do with like green energy and stuff. So I'm excited about that for sure.
Uh-huh.
But I bet there's a bunch of other stuff in there.
You follow like cruise ships and stuff in your environmental stuff?
Sorry, what?
You follow like cruise ship pollution stuff?
No, but I know there's no way.
That's what I did in my public administration. It's like one of the things like, there's a lot of stuff in the environment that not fast support of, that's one thing I'm like, that's kind of a problem.
Oh yeah, I bet you. I don't know much about it, but I bet you they. I bet, yeah. That I don't like. I hate fisheries and like fishing in the ocean, especially when they do I forget what it's called, but they drag a net across the bottom and they just destroy
Yeah.
everything. And they
Like
catch
simple methods like that.
Okay. And listen, if you're conservative, if you like Republicans, these are going to slam them a little bit, but I think they're kind of, these are kind of legitimate slams. I'm going to pull up, this is one of my favorite parody artists right now. He's a political guy who does all sorts of parody songs. So I'm going to play a couple of them. And this is going to give you my take generally on what's going on in, wow, that's loud. Let's see here. I got to share this with Andrew so he can get in on the fun too. And let me see, before I do that, I need to turn that down just a bit. That was kind of loud.
So it looks like Al Gore's banner.
What's that?
It looks like Al Gore's 2000 presidential.
Yeah, yeah. All right, here we go.
We need to send a message to Washington. We need fiscal restraint. Spent more than 8 years complaining about all the cash we spend. Asking for your vote and money, we need limited government. About how these deficits are costing us $1 trillion a pop. But vote for me, I'll be as stingy as a GameStop. And then I got elected and took over DC. Cutting back on spending is what I would do, you think? But I like it, I love it, I want some more of it. A wall so tall, you can't climb above it. Don't know what it is about the spending that I covet, but I like it, I love it, I want some more of it. The founding father daddies tried to teach me currency. Now my spending list is longer than a CVS receipt. Now I'm keeping old programs and taking out loans. I'm scrapping spending caps and I'm cranking out drones. I'm adding more spending, I'm throwing a parade. My list is shovel ready, so is most of what I trade. Cause I like it, I love it, I want some more of it. I talk a lot, it turns out I'm bluffing. Don't know what it is about the spending that I covet, but I like it, I love it, I want some more of it. Whoa. Don't forget to turn off the lights.
All right, so obviously this is talking about under Trump, right? Spending went, there was no fiscal restraint. There just wasn't, right? Even though this has been a Republican mantra forever, there just wasn't, right? So now,
Meet your next pillow.
Started the COVID-19 original package.
oh yeah, right? They just kept getting,
Why do we make our pillow in the shape of a cube?
what's that?
The first one was the most expensive one.
No, this last one was more expensive than that.
The first one, the 2.2 trillion? Oh, it was 2.2.
Oh, I'll have to go back. Well, if you add the Fed, then the first one was way, but I don't remember. I think this last one, the Fed did some stuff too. I'll have to go back and look. They were pretty close. When you're talking trillions of dollars,
It's the highest checks. we've ever signed.
I'll tell you.
right?
The problem with pillows is that they're trying to fit around.
Thank you.
Joe Biden will be the 46th president of these United States.
I left that tea party quicker than a poisoned Russian opposition leader. When my party took back the White House and I became a cheerleader. For the same $1 trillion deficits, 4 years I said we should end. Guess who's about to start caring again? Cause like a guy who's found himself addicted to Uber Eats. Well, it seems we're giving too much money to the Chinese. Isn't that the same spending contained in bills that you recently penned? The ideological difference is I'm about to start caring again. You'll hear me well, you'll hear me scoff, you'll see me fake, you'll hear me talk about how the spending's needing to go. Why for the past 4 years I didn't care, our fiscal policy looked like a Mr. Beast video. Cause when the president gets rich, us politicians get the itch to just defend our teams well and so. I'm about to start caring, about to start swearing. It's not a red herring, our debt needs repairing. I'm hereby declaring I'm about to start caring again. Woo!
Yeah. So
I saw on Twitter, like, they're on Fox News, they had like on the big screen, the national debt.
yeah, listen, and both sides do this. It's just, this is too easy to pick out, right now. Is all of a sudden you get all these Republicans who've become deficit hawks again, who under Trump, didn't have a problem spending. I mean, like I said, Trump had his own transportation proposal that he wanted to move through, and it was going to be every bit as egregious as whatever Biden's going to put through. And the only difference is one had an R by their name and one had a D by their name, and that's the level of support. Why you see support the way it is. Yeah.
Can I ask you my questions now?
Uh-huh. Oh yeah, you got questions today.
I'm not sure if they're good, so don't matter.
Good, bad, they're questions. We'll take them.
My first question is, do you believe that the Oklahoma court system is too harsh with its punishments and sentencing? Or what would be the leading cause of Oklahoma's incarceration problem?
Well, the courts aren't too harsh, or not too harsh in one sense, in that many times their courts are bound by what the law tells them, right? The judge has a sentencing criteria or framework that legislators have created for them. And this gets into issues like mandatory minimum sentences. It gets into issues like enhanced sentences for nonviolent, felons, these kinds of things. Are there some judges who are probably more inclined to give longer sentences than others? Probably so. But if I have to hang the incarceration problem in Oklahoma on anybody, it's going to be the folks at the legislature for writing the laws the way they did so, right? Because in many ways, they simply bind the judge's hands for what they can do. But yes, there are, and anytime, listen, this is an inescapable fact. You've got most judges in Oklahoma are elected, remember, right? You have all those district judges that are elected to their positions. If the majority of your constituents think that you ought to hang them high, well, what are you going to do if you want to keep your job? You're going to hang them high, right? So that's why I don't tend to like systems in which judges are elected is because you get that kind of outcome. And that can be true across a wide variety of things, but that's just one. But yeah, so you can't take out that electoral interest of, I know if the majority of people are going to vote in my elections want me to be quote unquote tough on crime, I better darn well be tough on crime if I want to continue getting elected, right? So there's some of that at play, but I would put most of it on the legislature.
Okay. My second question is, who is the Chief Justice in Oklahoma Supreme Court?
That's a good question because it rotates. So it's not like the US Supreme Court where the same Chief Justice is there until they retire or die or whatever. In Oklahoma, it rotates. So I'm going to cheat and I'll go look it up, right? Let's see if let's go to the quotes here. Oh, that's not what I want. Okay, there we go. Vice Chief Justice, Justice. Okay, I'll move this over so you can see it, and then I'll share this with Andrew too. Boom. All right, so the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court right now is Richard Darby. So left to right, so that would be him right there.
Why does the name sound so familiar?
I don't know. Noma Gurich was the Chief Justice, I think, up until last year.
And you interviewed her.
Yes. And
I know.
what's that?
It's the only one I know.
Yeah, she's the only one I know too, right? And I know her because when I worked at Oklahoma County, she was a district court judge in Oklahoma County. And so
It's related to it.
I'm sure, yeah. I am sure so. Yeah. So there you have it. Chief Justice Richard Darby.
Okay.
Look at that. I just know stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's nobody knows who any of the, if you went out and asked 100 people, can you name one person on the state Supreme Court? I would bet 90 of them couldn't name one.
It's hard to name even just like the national.
Yeah, no, it is,
I
right?
only know two.
I've got those down, but they keep changing on me. I picked state.
I'll go there before, but that's probably the only one I heard before. Courage.
Yeah. So there you go. Okay, what's your third one?
In the instance of a case where a landlord had received payment for a monthly payment for the house, if he then took the money, but didn't notify that the tenant had paid for it, and he filed an eviction notice on that person, would that be a criminal or a civil case? Since it's both breaking a law, with stealing money and breaking it.
Right. You're getting a little more into the legal weeds than I am per se expert at answering.
It's hard, it's judiciary.
Yeah, but I would say it could be both, right? But Oklahoma has what's called the Landlord Tenant Act, which governs the relationship and the obligations of both the landlord and a tenant, right? And to definitively ask your question, we'd have to jump into that and figure out what that act said, right? If they're going through eviction, then that means that's actually a judicial process, right? The courts have to issue an eviction notice. The sheriff's going to come out and all of that kind of stuff. If they're found to have falsified information in order to gain that eviction notice, I would think that would be a criminal act first, something like that. But I also think the tenant could probably at that point sue them in a civil court, right, for the harms that might have caused that tenant, right? So at the end of the day, you could conceivably see it be both, right?
Okay.
So I would hate to see somebody in that situation. That would not be good at all.
I have some more questions.
Oh my gosh. All right.
For my fourth question, if a person on trial and all the juries except for one find the person guilty and say just the one believe that he's innocent, would the notion of the entire trial be determined as innocent?
At that
since it
point,
wasn't
it's
even
considered a hung jury and you would not be convicted,
Okay.
right? In Oklahoma, for criminal trials, you must have a unanimous jury. And if you don't get convicted.
So my last question is, what's the difference between trial and court?
Say that again.
The difference between going to trial and going to court?
Well, you can go to court for a lot of things without being in your actual trial, right? So we have a lot of preliminary hearings where you show up and they're arguing over what evidence can be used and what evidence can't be used, or they're arguing over who's going to be allowed to testify, things like that. You have your arraignment hearing, which is the very first, basically the first time you'd show up in court, in which they formally charge you and you enter your plea, not guilty, whatever. And so there are a lot of times when you can show up in court, but it's not the trial, right? It is some other thing leading up to the trial. And then the trial is actually where the jury is going to sit and hear the evidence and make a verdict. Does that answer?
Yeah.
I hate to think is that clear as mud? Yeah, okay, but that's kind of the deal. All right, let's do this here. Hey, Aiden's with us too. How are you doing, Aiden?
Hey, I'm doing pretty well. Sorry, the last few weeks have been super crazy, and I've been trying to work on my project.
Hey, I totally get it. This has been the last 2 weeks have been crazy for me too. So I understand. We will all, as I've said before, we will all muddle through this thing together, right? At the end of the day, we will get there. All right, let's talk about taxes for a little bit. That's what we're here to talk about today. We did a little bit last time, but I've got a little bit more formal stuff here to work off of. All right, so major sources of tax revenue in Oklahoma should not be surprising. Okay, if you read the textbook, you'll see these, right? The income tax, okay, gross production taxes, primarily off oil and gas wells, but as we'll see, we also apply that to other items as well, minerals and such. Sales taxes and use taxes, and I'll explain what the differences of those are in a little bit. Vehicle taxes and licenses. We like to tax you when you buy a vehicle, which I'm about to discover, right? Motor fuel taxes, so that's basically gasoline and diesel taxes, and our wonderful sin taxes that we talked about on Monday, right? Primarily beverage, alcoholic, and tobacco taxes. What's that?
So save the Baptist.
Yeah, right. And then we have a variety of other things that sometimes we don't call taxes, but basically are, right? License fees, fees for hunting or whatever, right? So all sorts of things that we do. The franchise tax, which is basically a tax we put on businesses that's kind of small and meaningless, but we still do it. All right. Oklahoma income taxes. So we have an income tax for both individuals and corporations in the state. All right, it is the largest source of direct tax revenues for the state. It's mildly progressive on the individual side, meaning it starts at 0.5%, right? And if you're an individual at the point that you earn over $7,200 in a year, you're paying the top rate, which is 5%. If you're a married couple, you can earn up to $12,200 before you hit that top rate of 5%, but it caps out at 5%. Okay. The corporate income taxes are a flat 6%, regardless of how much your corporation earns. And these taxes go into the general fund. So these are the taxes that the legislature can do the most with. They have the most freedom in where to spend them. Okay. Sales taxes and use taxes. So in Oklahoma, sales taxes are basically applied to goods at the point of final sale. Okay. And most services in the state are not taxed or by the sales tax. All right. So if you hire a CPA, hire an attorney, hire a lawn service person, I think would cover this, right? That would be considered a service. You don't have to pay the sales tax on that. Okay. Use taxes are for goods purchased out of state but are delivered to the state. Okay, so and that would include today even online purchases, right? They're supposed to collect the taxes for that. But there are quite a bit of exemptions. We've already talked about this fact that services. By the way, back in the early 2000s, the then governor at the time pushed to have the sales tax applied to services. One of the leading opponents of doing that was the Oklahoman, because under Oklahoma state law, they don't have to charge the sales tax for newspapers. They're not considered a product or a good, they're considered a service. So, and I don't know whether or not the paper has ever come off that position, but at the time, they were one of the leading opponents of it.
Fallon, didn't Mary Fallon call
She
it?
proposed for doing that too, and it didn't go anywhere then either. An item that has an excise tax or other types of taxes applied to it won't necessarily be applied, have the sales tax applied to it. Sales by units of government, so excess property that might be sold on auction, lands that the government decides to sell. If the county government has taken up property because of failure to pay taxes on that property and they sell that at auction, these kinds of things would not be charged a sales tax. Sales by nonprofit organizations are not charged a sales tax either. If you have a farm and you sell agricultural goods directly on your farm, directly to consumers, you're not assessed the sales tax. Items that you purchase that you plan on reselling, turning around and reselling, right? So if I am a retail store and I buy, the mobile phones that I'm going to be selling, I don't pay the sales tax on those mobile phones, but when I sell them, I charge the sales tax at that final point of sale. Okay. So basically wholesale, what we call wholesale inventories are not charged the sales tax. Yeah.
Does the customer and the provider, they both pay a tax? Sales tax?
No. So the sales tax is going to be levied on the customer in most cases, right? Unless there's for some reason that the sales tax is prohibitively high where the customers would just not pay it, then the business would be in a position where they would have to eat that in some way, shape, or form, right? But when you go and buy, I threw it away, but if I buy this at the store, and let's say it's $2 and then I pay $2.16 because of the sales tax, I'm paying the 16, not the store, right? It's not split between us. They're going to collect that. So you might think of the sales tax similar to a tariff, right? Where the people who pay it are the people who are getting it, not the people who are selling it.
So there's no tax to sell merchandise?
Not through the sales tax. Now we've got corporate taxes, and we have that franchise tax that we place on businesses, but not as far as this. I'm not charged a tax to sell it to anybody. Yeah. All right. Severance taxes. All right. So we call these gross production taxes. We tax them basically on oil, gas, and uranium. I didn't know if you know that we mine uranium here in Oklahoma, but we do. And on oil and gas, it's 7% of the gross value of that's taken through the wells. 5% of the gross value of your uranium, Oil wells in operation for less than 36 months have a what they call an incentive rate that is dropped to 5%. So first 36 months, your oil well is producing, you pay a 5% gross production tax. After that 36 months, it goes up to 7%. This was the rate that was all the debate was about a couple of years ago when the legislature was talking about raising the gross production tax. So they weren't raising the top rate, that 7%, but prior to the legislation in 2017, 2018, that incentive rate was dropped to 2% for the first 36 months. And so when they raised it to that 5% where it's at now.
Do you think that means like they'll move operations, like put a new well in rather than keeping it and then going up to 7?
Well, regardless, I mean, I don't think they won't close a well that's actually producing, right? So as long as it's producing, they'll do it and they'll pay that 7%. The question is always, does that 7%, right, in that first 36 months, which is by and large when my understanding is when wells will produce the majority of what they're going to produce. Okay. And I'm not an expert in the oil industry, so don't quote me, but it's my understanding that's when they produce most of what they produce. And so the question is, if you raise that from that 2% to that 5%, does that discourage the development of future wells, right? And there's also, and listen, I've got people that I'm connected to that are on all sides of this issue. A lot of the oil and gas folks were saying this will definitely encourage us to drill in other states, or it will discourage us from drilling in Oklahoma, or both. Others were saying it's not going to have that big of an impact. We did see last year or the year before, we saw a decline in the development of new wells in the state. I don't know that we can attribute that at this point to the increase in the tax. Okay, so to answer your question, I don't know. Okay, as with a lot of this stuff, it can get really complicated in that what factors go into consideration when a company's trying to drill for oil, right? When your oil prices have tanked, you don't tend to have a lot of money to dwell for oil. And that kind of occurred around the same time that we saw the tax applied, right? So what does that mean? That means that the expected revenues from that tax will not be as great, right? But it also means that there are other factors that may have contributed to the reduction in the number of new wells that were developed as well. There you go. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. Okay. Yes.
How does the price of oil change? Like, does it change through the different amounts of oil you have, or like the amount of drivers?
It's all dependent on demand. How many people want it at any given time? That's why gas prices fluctuate like they do. It's why the price of a barrel of oil fluctuates. It's how much do you have and how many people want and how much do they want it?
Does the price of oil go up when demand is higher, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So and so that's what we're seeing right now, right? You have this price of oil going up, and most of it is due to this spike in demand. States are reopening, people are traveling more, and that's not just true in the United States, but that's true across the world, right? You see other countries where demand is spiking, and so that's driving that price higher, right? Because no matter how much oil you have, it's still a limited quantity, but our demand for it can be unlimited, right? We can want as much as we want, and so that's going to impact those prices and drive them up accordingly. So
people think I've heard people say like because Biden canceled the Keystone Pipeline, that's why.
Yeah, I've been arguing with some of my conservative friends over that too.
No.
The pipeline does not reduce oil availability because it's just a different mechanism for transporting. So the same amount of oil is being transported Now, I will say this, for those who are kind of on the left side that I've been having this discussion with as well, the pipeline, as far as a more environmentally friendly way of getting that oil where it's going, was way better than what we're doing right now, which is loading it up on trucks and on trains and sending them. And the cost to the environment of that is way higher than what that pipeline would be, right? So, but yes, in general, you might be able to make an argument that it would impact prices in the future, but that's some speculation that I'm not sure we've got a lot of grounds for. But the current rise in prices in oil is not because Biden discontinued the pipeline. Yeah.
The whole reason for the pipeline, wasn't it because it violated some type of Native American treaty in North Dakota?
That's not why Biden discontinued. Listen, this has been a running thing since the Obama administration, early in the, yeah. That has been one of the reasons why people didn't want it, right? Especially those Native American tribes, that the pipeline was going to run through their thing. I don't think that's the justification that Biden used. In fact, I haven't heard too much about what justification he did use, but that is a concern in those states where that pipeline was running, right? And I think when we discuss that, that is not a perspective that we should dismiss, right? That is certainly a perspective that has to be taken into account in this whole discussion. And except for the people who were there, right, around there, it might be a perspective that we have not considered as fully as we should have, right, in some way, shape, or form. So yes, for a lot of people, that has been one of the justifications. I just haven't heard Biden mention it as of yet. Now, maybe I missed it, and that could certainly be possible. It's not like I daily look to see what Biden's saying, but I haven't heard him use that as his primary reason for not continuing.
He only did it because people are told.
I think he's continuing a policy that the Obama administration had. I think there are some in his administration that are opposed to it for whatever reasons. But I do think at the end of the day, you cannot justify opposition to that based on purely environmental factors, because it is clearly a better environmental solution to transporting that oil than the way it's done now, right? If you want to make the argument that, yeah, but you're messing up the environment to build it, yes, but long term, that'll be way less than what we're doing is continuing to do it that way, right? There are other factors, as I said, as you brought up, the fact that there are several tribal governments that are like, these are on our lands, and they're on land, they run through lands that are religious, have religious significance to us. I think that's something you got to consider. There might be other reasons to oppose it besides that one, but I think those who want to argue that it's harming the environment, I think they've got a really hard road to say, but it's harming it more than what we're doing now. Yeah. All right, let's see, excise taxes, right? So excise taxes are simply special taxes that we apply, special sales taxes that we apply to special types of goods, right? So fuel taxes, which are right now for both gasoline and diesel, you've got about 20 cents of every dollar that you spend on fuel, it goes to the state of Oklahoma in the form of a fuel tax, right? And then the federal government also has its own fuel tax. So, but that's our excise tax on fuel. We have excise taxes on purchase of vehicles. I'll see if I can figure out what mine is when I go and pay it, and I'll report that back to you. All right. We'll figure out what that is, but it's basically based on the value of the vehicle, if I remember right. As we mentioned, if you buy hard liquor, you're going to pay $1.47 a liter. Okay, for that in taxes. For wine, it's 19 to 55 cents per liter. And for beer, it's roughly $12.50 per barrel. And a barrel holds 31 gallons, if you want to know how much that is. All right. So Want to go drink? You're going to pay up. The state's going to get its share, right? And then we place excise taxes also on tobacco products. Cigarettes, it's $2.07 a pack. Just in the state of Oklahoma, I believe the federal government, well, the federal government does have its own excise tax on tobacco products as well. And then for chewing tobacco or snuff, whatever the factory price is, add another 60% to it's
That's a lot.
60% of that factory price is what you're paying for that, right? So that's a hefty chunk. Go ahead.
Do you think that's like a good idea? Because I like that mostly poor people, take place, like smoke cigarettes or tobacco or snuff. Do you think it's a good idea that that's higher, or do you think it should be lower?
I think the two things. Number one, yes, you're disproportionately harming the lower income folks because they smoke and use tobacco more than middle and upper income folks do. Number two, the data on whether or not these actually discourage consumption of those items is mixed at best, right? And number three, if you're successful, you have a continuously dwindling source of revenues, right? If you do convince people through these taxes not to consume that, well, then now you've lost revenue, right? So ideally, what you want is a sin tax that doesn't discourage people from sinning, right? That simply will get them to pay more. Now, in Oklahoma, right? So tribal governments don't have to apply these excise taxes, right? So you can go to a smoke shop on tribal land and avoid paying that for tobacco and such. I think the same applies to fuel taxes as well.
My friend, like growing up, like I had a couple friends that like dipped or whatever, and they always went to like fire grocery store,
right?
And they were always saying it's a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, I guess.
And that is a point, obviously, of contention between the state of Oklahoma and the tribal governments, is that as a state, so the tax on cigarettes went up under that same legislation that increased the fuel taxes and such in 2017. They added another $1 to it to get it to that $2 figure. As that goes up, well, that just incentivizes people more and more to find other options in which to pay for that, right? Or to buy those things, right? Yeah.
Could they put like an excise tax on like a strip club, because that'd be considered in that sin category?
Well, they could, right? I mean, the government can tax just about anything that it wants to. It would be interesting to see what kind of impact that would have, right? Because who would be responsible for paying the tax, right? And who would be responsible for transmitting? This is the thing we have to remember is who pays the taxes and who sends the taxes to the tax collecting agency aren't always the same thing, right? In other words, the business is responsible for transmitting the sales tax to the tax commission, but the business is not paying the sales tax. You are paying the sales tax, right? Yeah.
Can a corporation be in trouble for not sending the appropriate amount?
Yes, they can.
Even if it's a small amount?
They can. If it's a small amount, they probably wouldn't get in a whole bunch of trouble, right? But if it's a major amount, and if it's a major amount, it's probably because they were doing whatever they could to avoid sending it in the first place. They could, end up in.
Tax evasion or?
Yep. Probably this is a good point to mention this as well. We're talked about this a little bit, but whether you're talking about excise taxes, sales taxes, corporate income taxes, the reality is corporations do not pay taxes. People pay taxes, all right? No matter what, at the end of the day, that corporation is going to take that money that they have to pay in taxes from people. They're going to take it from customers. They're going to take it from their employees, and they're going to take it from their stockholders, all right, to pay that tax, all right. That's the only place they can take it from. So that's where those taxes go. So any tax on a corporation is pretty much a hidden tax on people, no matter how you look at it. Corporations can't always recoup the cost of a tax from customers. It would, in many cases, it would simply drive the price of whatever they're selling too high. And so they can't always apply it to the customer. So they apply it to those other two groups, right? Employees in lower wages or less benefits, or stockholders in the form of lower profits. Okay. But one way or the other, people are going to be paying those taxes. The corporation is simply a collection point and a transmission vehicle. All right, motor vehicles. Let's see what we can find out about these. So excise tax of 3.25% on the vehicle, right? A sales tax in addition, and this was also new, added recently in that same legislation that we've been talking about that raised the gross production tax and the fuel taxes. This was included in that too. Added a sales tax of 1.25% to purchase that vehicle. License plate renewals, right? We all know that every year I get to, in fact, I've got to do that this week, or I'll likely get a ticket from somebody. Got to get my license plate renewed. So that's basically a tax for your vehicle. Driver's license fees, right? $38.50. I remember when it was 20 bucks. Now it's $38.50 to get my license renewed, which I also have to do this year. The state's getting some money from me this year.
There's like a big, Dr. Stacy was telling me that her driver's license expired like in December. And they like are only taking like a select amount of people every day.
Right.
So she hasn't been able to.
Real ID. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like governor issued an executive order that like for
Grace period.
Yeah, grace period, basically.
We'll see how that goes. I might have to call the legislator too and say, we need to expedite this process. And they might tell me, you're going to have to stand in line just like everybody else, just like we do.
Yeah,
I
a
don't
lot
know.
more connections than we do.
I don't know about that, but you've made a lot of connections out there.
Yeah.
You've been out there enough. You know some folks now.
I know a few, but I don't have the same phone call that if James Davenport gets on the phone. They're gonna say, "Okay, hustle. Everyone in the office."
Not quite, but all right. Let's see. Commercial and farm equipment also have excise taxes on them, but it's a completely different schedule from just transfer, what we call passenger vehicles. The revenues from these taxes are basically split between the general fund and school districts. Okay. Property taxes. So property taxes actually don't go to the state. Okay, they go to county governments. Well, they're split primarily between county governments and school districts. Okay, they're assessed and they're collected by county governments in Oklahoma, and the assessment's based on what they call the fair cash value of the property. Okay. And each county has the ability to make that assessment and determine, what that'll be. Personal property is technically supposed to be included in this assessment. So not just the home structure or the office building, but the personal property contained therein. However, the intrusive nature of enforcing that would be such that there would probably be a riot very quickly, and so they don't do it. Okay, rarely do they attempt to assess the value of the personal property inside the property. As I mentioned, counties can vary in their assessments for similar properties across the state. All right, county assessors are all elected officials, and to keep their jobs, they have to not get too many of their citizens riled up at them. And so they're going to tailor their assessments in a way that prevents that from happening. Yeah,
When they say property taxes, I wanna try to understand what they mean with property. Does it just mean homes, or does it mean like place of business?
primarily it's real estate,
Real
any
estate?
land,
Okay.
right? So that can be a home, that can be a business structure, that can be a field out here that you own, right?
Boat or RV.
Those would be, they are taxed as vehicles, so they're taxed differently, yeah. Now, I don't know about well, I won't even go there. Yeah, boats and RVs and stuff are considered vehicles and they would be taxed as vehicles.
So if I buy a house, I'll pay like taxes on it.
You will not pay taxes per se when you purchase it, but you will pay property taxes that are assessed annually. What a lot of people do, and oftentimes when you buy a home and you get a mortgage, so you're basically taking a loan out to pay for it, you'll have an account, it's called an escrow account, where your monthly payment will include an estimated amount to cover the property taxes for that year and your homeowner's insurance that you'll be required to cover. All right. It goes into that account and then it's paid annually from that account. So it's just kind of automatic. It's factored. Your total payment includes those two things in it. Not everybody does that, right? And if I buy a house for cash, I don't have to have that property insurance like homeowners do if you're taking out a mortgage. And I might not have an escrow. That means I've got to be responsible for paying that stuff on my own, right?
So I have a couple questions. So what happens if you pay too much? Like say they underestimate it and you pay it, like, do you get that money back or do they keep it, the mortgage people?
No, you would get that back.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then my second question. So the school districts, why do they base the property taxes? Like, why does that revenue go to school districts? Because I've seen like in poor areas, they don't have that much property taxes.
Right.
So their schools aren't going to be that well funded. And so that means worse education.
It started, well, basically, remember, school districts are local units of government, right? Now in Oklahoma, we used to have county school districts, right? And so each county would be its own school district. I forget when that got changed, but it got changed. And so now instead of having 77 school districts, Oklahoma has like 520 something or 530 some school districts in our state. Each school district is a local unit of government that has to be funded in some form or fashion. I'm not sure to what, I can't tell you the history of how property taxes became the primary source of doing that. I don't know how that occurred. I can tell you there was, back in the 1980s, there was a series of suits in states across the country over this issue of unequal funding for schools. And many states had to completely revise the way they fund their schools because the courts came in and said, this is violating basically the equal protection clause of the 14th Amendment. And you've got to do that. Oklahoma did not have to do that though, because we have what is it called? For lack of a better term, an equalization process in which we make up for certain revenues that some districts don't get via property taxes and whatnot. And so it makes the revenues more equal. Doesn't make them equal, but makes them more equal than what they would be otherwise. And so, but you are correct. You still have some very wealthy school districts because there are tons of property taxes, and very poor school districts because there aren't hardly any. And it does call into question whether or not that's the best way at this point in time to do this. But you want to talk about a fight, you want to talk about a political fight that would get ugly really, really fast. You propose some other method for funding schools, right? And that's going to look really, you're going to see all sorts of people.
I don't even, like, I don't know what other,
Yeah.
like, do a self, but
You could do it through the general fund, right? but then you have the question of, well,
Yeah, like.
where do we get those additional funds from? Because the property tax doesn't go to the state, right? So now you're talking about adding another obligation onto the general fund that you don't have a revenue source for, right?
Do they ever put like, people like Wright Thompson and what's the other guy's name, Kevin Wallace, maybe, in places where they do something and then those two have to just figure out how to fund it or in the legislature in a way?
Well, every year you kind of have that question, right? Those things that the legislature directly is involved in funding. Every year they've got to figure out, again, how much revenues do we have coming in, right? And remember, they're limited to spending no more than 95% of those revenues that are projected, okay? So they've got to say, okay, here's the revenues that we expect to have. Here's all of the funding priorities. Here are all the things that we want to fund. And now it's about who gets first dibs and how much do people get and what's the priorities, right? So yeah, every year they've got to sit down basically and do that.
And I'm guessing this year it's gonna be a lot lower since the pandemic, right?
Actually, Oklahoma has not seen our revenues yet. In fact, we are expecting to have
Oh, really?
an increase in revenues for this year. So
I guess
I'm trying to remember what, I'll have to go back and look. There were a couple of things that specifically have been credited as producing that, right?
I bet you it's probably like the sins taxes. I bet like the alcohol maybe.
Yeah, a lot of people have been buying alcohol the last year, right? But I am not sure. I'll go back and research that and figure out what that is that they said. But there are a couple of things that have driven that kind of increase. And of course, now with gas prices going up again, for the government of Oklahoma, that's good for them, right?
Now
For your pocketbook, not so good for you, right? So,
I would hate to be the person chairing one of those appropriation committees.
oh yeah.
Especially considering I hate math. I mean, it just sounds like torture.
Well, I can tell you, we talked about when we went through the executive branch, Leslie Osborne, who's now the labor commissioner, her political career pretty much got tanked because she was the chair of the appropriations committee. And she was like, we can't fund all this stuff that you guys, that everybody's saying they want if we don't raise some taxes. And she was a Republican saying that. And so she got crosswise with a lot of people, both inside the legislature and outside, for like saying, look, the numbers just don't add up. Yeah, it's not an enviable position, right? When your constituency is all like, don't spend, don't spend, don't spend, but then they also want all this stuff, right? At the national level, it's easier to do because at the national level, I don't have a balanced budget requirement. I can spend ourselves into oblivion and not have the tax revenues for it, and not going to. In Oklahoma, you're prohibited from doing that, right? Which I find in this pandemic is really ironic because the federal government has been sending out these checks, a third round of checks. I heard there's a fourth round that might be coming too, right? Heard that just yesterday, that there are already talks about another round. The checks they send me keep going up. So, hey, I'm being somewhat facetious.
I think the lesson we're learning here is to prepare for future situations like this. Have as many kids as you can.
There you go, right? But the federal government is sending all this money out to people ostensibly because of the economic consequences of the shutdowns and lockdowns and businesses slowing down and all this kind of stuff, right? But who drove that train? Did the federal government tell everybody, don't go to work, don't go to, no, it doesn't. In fact, there's good reason to believe that constitutionally, the federal government does not have the authority to do that. So who was doing that? State governments and local governments, right? So state governments and local governments are causing, for the most part, most of the economic pain, people are dealing with through this period. But who's picking up the tab for that economic pain that was caused? Is it state and local governments? No, it's the national government. Why? Well, by and large, most states can't just spend money like it's growing on trees, right? Can't just print more money. The federal government can. And so we're in the situation that because these states have them limited themselves. Again, this is not anything required in the US Constitution. It doesn't say states can't do this. Each state can decide whether or not it can go into debt or not. And most of them have said, no, we're not going to do that. Well, when you have a crisis like this and you have to find extra money to address it, that only gives you a couple of options. You either cut the funding that you've got to certain programs right now to redirect, or you raise taxes to address the issue, right? So I think it's ironic that the entities that cause the economic pain are not the entities that are being expected to alleviate the economic pain, right? And that's just the nature of American politics right now, right? Is how that's playing out. All right, okay. We won't even have a chance to get through all of these different wonderful slides with wonderful graphics of these tables in chapter 12, but a couple of things to note, okay? Let's see, do I really want to talk about relative tax burden? Okay, so Oklahoma doesn't have a very high tax burden, whether you want to look at it as the amount of taxes assessed per capita. So per capita just means per person, right? Or as a percentage of total income, right? So you look in the region, we're pretty low. In fact, per capita taxes, we're the lowest in the region, right? Nobody's lower than us. Nationally, we're at 47th, that's per capita. And we're 46th as taxes as a percentage of total income. And again, we're the lowest in the region as well. So we said last time, Oklahoma is a low tax state, okay? We make up for that. How do we make up for that low taxes? That's where all those fees and such come in, right? That we can use, right? Per capita personal income. We're also low in per capita personal income, right? We just don't have a lot of super wealthy people in the state. And again, if you look at these numbers, you've got New Mexico and Arkansas are the only two in the region that have a per capita income lower than ours. Okay, and we land a little bit better than our, higher than what our tax burden is, about 37th in the country as far as per capita income. With Colorado, interestingly enough, Colorado being the highest in our region. Per capita income.
Wow.
Yeah.
He went in Colorado.
I love Colorado.
Let's see, per capita property sales and income taxes. So again, that's how much you per person is paid, right? So this is an average basically. And you can see on state and local property, Oklahoma is pretty low and we're 49th in the country. And we're again, so Oklahoma has really low property taxes.
I
Okay.
think that has a correlation to us being ranked low in education.
I would have to go and look and see how other states that have similarly low property taxes, how they perform educationally, before I would be willing to answer that. I do think the textbook makes a point that property taxes tend to be a type of tax that you get a lot of people riled up about paying. But it also is one of the most stable sources of revenue that a state can have, or any government can have too. You don't see the wild fluctuations in property taxes that you see in like the gross production taxes or fuel taxes or even sales taxes in general. Sales taxes, so we're a little bit higher on sales taxes per capita, but still in our region, low, right? Again, you've got Missouri and Colorado, the two states with lower per capita sales tax than Oklahoma has. And then the income tax, which obviously Texas doesn't have, so you kind of have to take them off the line there. But you can see, again, not too many states lower than us. So our income is low and our taxes are low. Okay. I'm going to skip this slide. You guys can look at that later on. What do I want to look at here? Okay, so this is that concept of centralization, right? What percentage of state and local taxes are collected by the state government, right? So in Oklahoma, remember, sales taxes, when I buy this bottle and I pay 16 cents in sales taxes for the $2 bottle, half or more of that is going to be going to local governments, but it goes to the Oklahoma Tax Commission first, who then sends it to those local governments, right? So the tax commission is the collection authority, even for those local sales taxes. And so that's what this is getting at. How many states and how much of those state and local taxes do you see? Well, Oklahoma has about 62%. So that doesn't happen with property taxes, right? Property taxes go directly to counties, who then distribute it to the school districts or anybody else receiving them. But sales taxes absolutely do, as would vehicle taxes and things like that as well. So we're kind of, it looks like in the middle range here. Arkansas is definitely the highest. New Mexico is higher than we are. And Colorado's pretty close to us, right? With, it looks like Texas being the lowest on that. Tax freedom days. So this is basically just an assessment of how long you have to work to pay the taxes for the year that you owe, right? Oklahoma, pretty early, right? Number 2 in the nation, actually. So we get out of that at March 30th. Whereas if you look at, let's see, I think Kansas is the longest one there at April 15th. So that's always a fun ranking just to look at.
What is that? What does that mean?
That just means if you paid if all of your paycheck for that amount of time went just to pay your taxes, how long in the year would you have to work to pay your taxes?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's all that means.
Oh, okay, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. All right, let's look at, major state and local tax sources as a percentage of total revenue. So property taxes in Oklahoma make up about 20% of total revenue. Sales and use taxes, 44%. Individual and corporate income, motor vehicle, and you look in our region, Oklahoma is the highest, and we're way above the national average on vehicle taxes, right? And then other categories, another one that would include those gross production taxes and whatnot. Okay. Wait, there's a slide here. Where did that go? I wanted to point out one. That's not it. Maybe it was that one that I missed. Well, shoot, I didn't include it in here. There's another slide in the textbook that talks about intergovernmental transfers as a percentage of total state budget. I'll have to go back and find that one. But that is, so how much money does the state get from the federal government as a portion of its total budget? In Oklahoma, it's roughly about 25%, if I remember right, of what we spend comes from the federal government. So again, it's just and in most of that, that's for programs, you might say, like certain welfare programs, things like that, housing programs, in which that spending eventually goes to an individual rather than to a governmental entity. The lower levels of government are nothing more than pass-through entities. Okay, table 12-8. Well, I thought I had 12-8 on here. Maybe I mislabeled it. You guys, hold on here. That's 9. That's 10. That's 7. Nope, I don't have it in here. Okay, well, that upsets me. All right, so yeah, Oklahoma gets 25.4% of its total revenues from the federal government. The highest in our region is New Mexico at 34.8%. And the lowest looks like it's Kansas at 16%. So roughly. So there you have it. What kind of features, what kind of things stand out in our system? We've got low property taxes, high sales taxes as relative compared to other states, lots of fees and fuels. That's good spelling. Lots of fees and licenses. Our reliance on that gross production taxes really makes our revenue base unstable, right? We are subject to the whims of the oil and gas markets, right? We've got lots of exemptions to property taxes. So if you are a disabled veteran, you're exempt from paying property taxes. If you are over the age of 65, you get a reduction in your property taxes. We do lots of stuff like that. And our system is somewhat inelastic, which your book talks about as being, it's not one that as the wealth within the state grows, or the state's ability to collect even proportionately the taxes to match that growing wealth does not occur, right? So the way our tax system is structured, state revenues don't grow as the overall wealth in the society grows. Right, so there you have it.
So what's another way, instead of using property taxes, what are other ways that you could fund schools? What's the other, what ways do other people?
So the state, part of funding education comes from the general fund, and I think every state has that kind of set up as well. I know your textbook talks about how some of the taxes on vehicles can go to school districts. I doubt that it's a whole lot, but there's some there. I mean, theoretically, there's no shortage of different ways that you could fund schools. It's just, what will people tolerate, right? What will people either think as being fair, right? To my knowledge, there would be nothing. I don't know if a school district could do this or not. I'd have to look and see. I don't know if a school district could do its own sales tax, right? I'm not sure they could. But again, there are lots of debates about what, the effectiveness of sales taxes or who that hurts most. Emilio.
When you say sales tax, do you mean just charging students' parents to attend the school?
No, I'm telling you a sales tax. So yeah, so the school district, so all school districts have a geographical boundary, right? So the idea here would be, if I go to the convenience store and buy a soda, a Dr. Pepper or something, could the school district assess an additional sales tax on what you're already paying that would go directly to that school district, right? To help fund it.
Of that district,
Right, it would only apply to sales in the boundary of that school district.
How would that work for like students that live in like country areas?
Wherever you buy, whatever you buy is what school district that would go to, right? So just like I live in Oklahoma City technically, but if I go to OnQ in Midwest City and I pay the sales tax there, that goes to Midwest City,
Yeah.
right?
So you're
So,
pulling in.
so it's just a matter.
Area.
Oklahoma, like, school district would probably benefit from, well, I don't know, maybe, because a lot of people travel. to
It
Oklahoma
could.
City.
Now, listen, I don't know if the school districts are authorized. The state of Oklahoma would determine whether or not school districts are even authorized to. Some county governments in Oklahoma, many county governments in Oklahoma have their own sales tax. Oklahoma County does not, but many other, especially these smaller counties do. You could, create a special kind of tax. You could, I mean, if you wanted to get really ugly about it, you could charge tuition of some sort. That's nothing more than a tax when you get down to it, right? So there are lots of ways. We don't, right? We tend to think of we talk about a free public education. I hate that word free, by the way, but we talk about that, right? So there's huge resistance to that idea. But if you're just thinking of different ways that you could fund it, that would have to be one of the ones that would be rejected as soon as you brought it up. But it certainly would be another way of taxing it, right?
What those those school districts that had to get off property taxes because of the 14th Amendment, what districts are there, or what?
Texas was one. I know Texas was. That was because I lived in Texas not long after that ruling came down, and they had to really revise how they were doing it. I think they had to go to a mechanism more similar to what Oklahoma does, in fact. But I'm not sure. I can't tell you precisely how they restructured to do that. But
Texas has like a lot of good high school, like the
Uh-huh.
high school football stadium. A lot of them are nicer than like colleges.
yeah,
Allen High School.
Yeah.
what you got, Emilio?
Do you think schools that have, like you were saying, high athletic programs or mostly like victorious high school athletic programs, that money revenue from those games that goes straight to the school fund?
So revenue from sporting activities generally will stay with the school's athletic budget, I believe. Now, don't quote me on that. But what's interesting, and I don't know about high schools, but I suspect that it's probably similar to colleges. In most colleges, most major universities that run, major sports teams and whatnot, the sports programs do not make money. There's about 10 Division I universities that actually make money off their sports programs.
Is that you want?
I think they were the last time I remember it, but they weren't. But I don't remember.
Football probably accommodates for a lot of like
At OU, football would be the driver.
Yeah,
right.
Like other sport like swimming, no one goes to watch swimming.
Like basketball,
Yeah.
like Kentucky.
That one, yeah. Kentucky's basketball program might, Kansas's basketball program might make a little bit of money.
Texas or OU or Alabama.
But in usually those money making sport activities like football, basketball, so are subsidizing the other sporting activities, and in general they don't make enough to totally subsidize them, and so they have to pull money from other places funding them. So yeah, and there's always debate about especially high school sports and whether or not those are resources that could go to more educational activities or whatnot. We don't have time to get into that discussion, but you do have that issue. We have a perennial discussion at the legislature about consolidating school districts. Do we need 520 some or 30 some, however many we have? And there are debates about that all the time as well. and whether or not consolidating them would actually reduce the amount of cost of delivering educational services. There's lots of debate about that also. So anyway, it's time to go. We're going to get together tomorrow at roughly 6. Is that what we said?
Yes, I'll email it.
Okay, and we'll meet over at the LRC.
Oh, forget it.
Yeah. All right, good. See you guys later.
See ya.